Hello, hello everybody, and welcome back to Captain Patriotic. How are you folks doing? I apologize for the delay in the last time that I recorded a video until now. I was on vacation for a couple of weeks there, having a good old time, spending some time with myself and really just taking the time to rejuvenate and everything. Well, as luck would have it, as soon as I got home from vacation, I came down with a really bad cold and was out of commission for a couple of weeks. And don't worry, you guys, I'm feeling a lot better and more like my normal self now than I was a couple weeks ago, thank goodness. Well, today, I want to bring to you a new topic of discussion. Now, I know a lot of us here are familiar with World War II and Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. These wars have been taught in school so much that we could practically memorize certain battles from these certain conflicts. However, there is one particular conflict that really isn't popular, at least among the knowledge base of the average American. And that particular conflict that I'm talking about, everybody, is the Korean War, or the Forgotten War by a lot of people. Now, some of you might be wondering, what exactly is the Korean War? Well, basically, the Korean War is considered the first armed conflict that America participated in, which pitted us against the communist forces of Russia and their allied countries at the time. It was a very, very big deal, you guys. And to be honest with you, whenever the war broke out in 1950, nobody was prepared for another war because World War II had literally just ended in late 1945. In 1950, a lot of the warring nations and where a lot of battles took place were still in the height of rebuilding all of their cities and fields and what have you from the very significant and famous battles, costly battles from World War II. So a lot of people were basically thrown by surprise by this war that starts in the middle of 1950. Like I was saying, the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 until 1953, is considered the first armed conflict of the nearly 5 decades long Cold War, which started in 1945 after World War II ended. And the Korean War actually broke out on June 25th, 1950, whenever 75,000 members of the North Korean People's Army invaded South Korea by crossing over the 38th parallel, which separates the two countries, in an attempt to reunite Korea under one communist government. As you could only imagine, that did not sit well with other nations across the world, especially those that were a part of the new United Nations Committee that was formed after World War II ended, which included many prominent members, including the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and other powerful countries of the time. Now, there's not a definite death toll as far as like how many people actually lost their lives during the Korean War, but there are some estimates though. A lot of people think that between 2 and 4 million people died during this 3-year-long war, with 70% of those casualties being civilians. And it's interesting to know, however, that when the hostilities ended in 1953, no really official peace treaty was ever signed between the two warring Koreas. Now, that debate was finally settled in December of 2021 between the United States and North Korea, but that's beside the point. This leads me, and I'm sure other people have this same question, what exactly led to another major war shortly after World War II ended in Korea. Well, to answer that question, you guys, it's pretty complicated as far as what exactly led to this war, but there was a multitude of different things that led to this armed conflict between South Korea and its allies, as well as North Korea and their allies, too. But I'm happy to go over some highlights for you real quick. And basically, guys, to sum it up, for centuries, Korea was considered a unified kingdom before Japan annexed Korea following their victory in the 1904 through 1905 Russo-Japanese War. In fact, Japan annexed Korea in 1910 and ruled it with an iron fist until the end of World War II in 1945. The Japanese used assimilation tactics like forbidding the Korean language and de-emphasizing Korean history in favor of Japanese culture in order to weaken their colony. So fast forward to 1945, and when Japan surrendered to the Allies following the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, control of the Korean peninsula passed from Japan to the Americans as well as the Soviet Union. Those two superpowers chose to divide Korea between themselves at the 38th parallel, which basically roughly divided the peninsula in half. And it didn't correspond to political, cultural, or terrain boundaries either. The Soviets set up a communist government to the north, while the United States helped to establish a military democratic government in South Korea. So, at the time, Korean politics ran the gamut from communism on the extreme left to right-wing nationalists, all vowing for power. And there was a lot of contention between the Soviet and U.S. occupation forces, as well as the polarization of the two kinds of Korean leadership. It pretty much led to a pretty volatile or sketchy situation, to say the least. And the thing was, each government viewed the other as illegitimate, so both actually wanted to invade each other to unify Korea under different forms of government, basically. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, things actually got worse in the late 1940s, specifically between 1948 and 1950, whenever scattered border skirmishes kept tensions simmering. In fact, it was in 1948 whenever the United States called on the United Nations to sponsor a vote for Koreans to determine their future government. And whenever the North Koreans refused to participate, South Korea formed its own government in Seoul under the anti-communist Syngman Rhee. So in retaliation, Kim Sung, a former communist guerrilla, was named the premier of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or known today as North Korea. Kim Sung went to Moscow in 1949 and began in 1950 to seek Soviet support for the invasion of South Korea. And he was able to convince Joseph Stalin to commit to providing support for that invasion of South Korea. It's also noted that he was able to get a verbal commitment from China and its leaders, basically as a backup if the Soviets didn't fall through with their promises. In other words, this was the perfect storm for a long, bloody war that basically nobody was prepared for at the time. So, whenever North Korea invaded South Korea on June 25th, 1950, basically North Korea was banking on the U.S. not coming to the aid of South Korea. And North Koreans were very strong, and they had the aid of experienced veterans from the Chinese Civil War and World War II from Russia. And basically, whenever this invasion happened, North Korea made swift progress southward. In fact, we'll get into this later, they nearly took over the whole entire peninsula in the first 2 months of the war. Basically, what this means is at the start of Korea in 1950, it was a dicey situation for both sides because nobody knew, one, how to respond to such a threat, but also how to rile their troops together in order to combat this force because at the time, a lot of militaries around the world, including the United States, actually cut back their military strength significantly after World War II because they never thought that another war would come out so soon. So, this basically is what led to the Korean War.